Hello, my dear. It's Evelyn. I wish I could say this is a happy story, but the truth? It begins with a heartbreak I never saw coming. My son stood in my living room, the same one where he took his first steps, where we used to cuddle under blankets during storms, and he said it so casually, like he was talking about the weather. I decided to sell your house to buy a new car for my wife. She's more important. I didn't hear anything after that. The clock ticked behind me, loud and slow, like it was counting down to something irreversible. The words echoed through me, sharp and cold. She's more important. My knees went weak, but I didn't fall. I just stood there, still, as if moving would shatter the little pieces of myself that were holding on by a thread. He kept talking, his voice matter of fact. The market's good right now. I've already talked to an agent. With what we make on the sale, I can get her the SUV she wants and put some toward the remodel. She's been so patient, Mom. She deserves this. He looked proud of himself. That was the moment, right there, that split my life in two. Not when my husband died. Not even when the doctor said the word arthritis like it was a life sentence. No, it was when my own son, the child I carried through fevers and scraped knees and heartbreaks, stood in front of me and said, "You are less important than leather seats and chrome trim." I remember I nodded, just nodded like a fool. I said, "Oh, that's all." Oh, because how do you respond to something like that? I'd baked him a pie earlier that day, peach, his favorite. It was still on the counter, untouched, the crust golden, the sugar glittering. I'd been proud of how it turned out. Ridiculous, really. Pride in a pie. As if that might be enough to make a son remember the woman who raised him. He didn't even glance at it. Just checked his phone, muttered something about needing to beat traffic, and said, "I'll have Rachel call you with the paperwork." And then he left. Just like that. He didn't hug me. He didn't look back. I sat down on the couch, the same old couch that's gone lumpy from years of bodies sinking into it. I stared at the pie. It looked obscene now, like some kind of offering to a god that had already turned his back. I didn't cry, not right away. That came later, in the quiet, when the truth finally settled like dust in the corners of my chest. I had built a life around a son who now saw me as real estate. And I could not, let that be the end of my story. They say betrayal doesn't always come like thunder. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it's the way your name disappears from the story of a house you built. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at the edge of my bed, the bedside lamp casting a pale yellow circle onto the carpet, and I went over everything in my head. Every dollar I'd spent, every favor I'd given, every, "Of course, sweetheart," I had whispered into the phone when they needed something. And then I went to the file drawer. I hadn't opened it in years. I'd labeled the folder "important" back when I still believed that word had weight. Inside were all the documents, the deed to the house, the financial records, the power of attorney forms I had signed just in case. All of it neat, all of it clear, all of it with his name next to mine. Because when my husband died, I didn't know who else to lean on. Caden had sat at the table across from me that day, his hands folded like a little boy who wanted a cookie. "Let me help, Mom," he said. "Let me take care of things." I'd been so tired and so grateful. Funny how trust turns into a noose, doesn't it? By morning, I had a plan. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't rage. It was survival. It was dignity. Mine. Waking up from a long sleep. I went to see my lawyer, Paula. She used to babysit Caden when she was a teenager, which made the whole thing sting that much more. She didn't say much when I told her, just blinked a few times, then said, "We'll fix it." She pulled the original deed, scanned through the paperwork, and then stopped. "Did you know he added a clause to the power of attorney?" she asked, her voice like a tightrope. "A sale clause. Gives him the right to initiate real estate transactions in your name unless expressly revoked." No, I didn't know. I didn't remember signing that, but there it was, my signature in black ink at the bottom of the page. I felt my stomach lurch. I remembered that day. It was a Tuesday. I had a doctor's appointment that morning and a migraine in the afternoon. He'd come by with a folder and said, "Just a couple updates, legal housekeeping." He brought Chinese takeout and I'd signed them at the table between bites of lo mein. My own son had handed me my future in a locked box and convinced me to throw away the key. Paula reached across the desk and touched my hand. "Don't panic," she said. "We can revoke this. You're still lucid, still competent. You haven't been deemed incapacitated. We can file an emergency motion today to freeze any transactions." I nodded, numb. And then she said the thing that made the ice inside me finally crack. "Evelyn, has he been taking money from you too?" I looked away. The answer was yes, but I hadn't called it taking. I called it helping, I called it love, I called it just until they get back on their feet. The boutique, the kitchen remodel, the private school, the unforeseen expenses, all those late-night calls that began with, "Hey Mom, I hate to ask, but..." I didn't even know how much I'd given. Not really, but I would. That night, I opened my laptop, I opened my spreadsheets, and I started building a list. By the time the sun rose, I knew this. They hadn't just tried to sell my house, they'd already sold me. I didn't know betrayal could come with itemized receipts. But as I sat at my desk that next morning, staring at line after line of transfers, purchases, wires, and cosigns, it all began to take shape, a shape I didn't want to look at. But I forced myself to, because once you decide to stop being erased, you can't look away again. I had it all, down to the last penny. $3,200 for the boutique's grand reopening, $11,000 for the down payment on their first car, $9,800 for the second. Private school tuition for my grandson? That had ballooned past $60,000 over the years. Medical bills for their dog, landscaping invoices, Rachel's wellness retreat in Sedona, all of it flowing from my accounts. I'd never tallied it before, because that would have made it real, and if it was real, I might have had to admit that what I was doing wasn't love, it was enabling, it was abandonment of myself. Paula called just before lunch. "The injunction went through," she said. "The house is protected, he can't touch it. But Evelyn..." She hesitated, the way people do when they're about to pull the next brick out from under your foundation. I pulled his financials, I had to. He's been leveraged for years. Credit cards maxed, personal loans. There's even a second mortgage. He used your house as collateral for a line of credit last year. I didn't speak. I couldn't. "There's more," she continued gently. "The car wasn't the reason he wanted to sell. That was a smokescreen. He's being sued, quietly. Business partner from that real estate deal. Caden's trying to liquidate anything in his name. Fast. He wasn't just stealing from me. He was using me as a shield for his failures, selling off my life to cover the cost of his. And I had handed him the keys. I sat there for a long time after we hung up, the silence pressing in like fog. I kept thinking about the day he was born, the way his tiny hand curled around my finger, how he used to run into my arms at full speed when he saw me at the end of the school day. That boy would have never sold my house, but that boy was gone. Rachel called that evening as if summoned by fate. "Evelyn," she said sweetly, with the performative sigh of someone who always wanted to be seen as the victim. "Caden told me about your decision. I just want you to understand how much pressure he's under. You holding on to the house isn't helping." "I'm not holding on," I said, my voice level. "I'm reclaiming what's mine." A pause, just long enough for her mask to slip. Then, "You've always said you wanted what's best for us. We're the future, Evelyn. You're the past." She didn't mean to say it out loud, but she did. And with that one sentence, she laid bare the truth I'd been circling for months. They had already buried me. I was just the body they hadn't bothered to move yet. I hung up on her. I didn't even bother to reply, because something bigger was forming, a quiet, deliberate storm. I reached back into my drawer, pulled out the folder marked Gilded Fern, LLC, that boutique they named after some plant I'd never heard of. I flipped to the back pages. There it was. A notarized agreement, my signature, a bailout, $60,000. In exchange, 51% ownership. I had forgotten, but they had too. That little shop wasn't just Rachel's brand, it was legally mine, and it was time they remembered. The next morning, I put on my navy wool coat, the one I saved for funerals and courtroom appearances, and I drove to the Gilded Fern. It was early, the air still holding that sharp bite of late winter, and the storefront hadn't opened yet. But the lights were on inside. I could see Rachel through the glass, flitting around like a hummingbird, rearranging candles and throw pillows, her phone cradled between shoulder and ear, barking soft, sugary commands at someone on the other end. I waited, calm as a lake before a storm. When she noticed me, her brows lifted, just slightly. Irritation, not surprise. She hung up and opened the door with that brittle smile she wore when she wanted something. "Evelyn," she said, too bright, "didn't expect you." "No," I agreed, "you didn't." I stepped past her, into the space I had funded, the space that existed because I'd once emptied my savings with nothing more than a hope and a signature. It smelled like lavender and lies. "Would you like tea?" she offered, already retreating behind the register like it was a castle wall. "I'm testing new blends for spring. I'm not here for tea." I reached into my bag and pulled out the envelope. The ownership agreement, the notarized contract, my 51%. I laid it gently on the counter like a communion wafer. Rachel's eyes darted to the paper, then back to me, and for the first time, her smile cracked. "What is this?" she asked, though she already knew. "My reminder," I said, "that this place, this boutique, this brand, isn't just yours." She laughed. Short, forced. "You can't be serious? That was years ago." "7," I said, "and it's still binding." "You wouldn't actually—" "I already have." I let the silence sit between us, a patient creature. I watched her face cycle through denial, calculation, then something new. Fear. "Caden won't let this happen," she said finally. I smiled, but it wasn't kind. Caden doesn't have the power to stop me, legally or otherwise. I could see it then, the panic blooming behind her eyes like mold on silk. "I want a full audit," I continued. "Every dollar spent, every loan taken. I want access to the books, effective immediately." "You can't just—" "I can," I said, "and I will." She stared at me like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her. Maybe she didn't. Maybe the Evelyn she'd known, the woman who funded her candles and nodded politely while being condescended to at dinner, had finally died. "I gave you everything," I said quietly, "and you tried to erase me." Rachel didn't answer, because there was nothing left to say. I left the boutique with the keys in my pocket. Not literally, those I'd get later, but the legal ones, the ownership, the leverage, and I wasn't done yet. That evening, I went back to Paula with the document. She read it twice, lips pressed into a firm line. "You've got her cornered," she said. "They won't go down without a fight." "I'm not afraid of fights," I replied. "I've survived wars." The next day, the letters went out. Certified mail, return receipt requested. One to Rachel, one to Caden, one to the boutique's bank. Notice of intent to enforce ownership rights. The silence that followed was delicious. 3 days passed, then a knock on my door. Caden. His face looked older than I remembered. Pale, tight around the mouth. He stood there like a child summoned to the principal's office, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "We need to talk," he said. I stepped aside, said nothing. Let him come in. He didn't sit, just hovered near the bookshelf like he needed a reason not to look me in the eye. "Rachel's upset," he started. "So am I." He looked at me then, really looked, and I saw it, the flicker of shame, the boy I'd once known, lost inside the man who had become a stranger to me. "You blindsided us." "No, Caden," I said softly. "You sold me first. I'm just cashing the check." He winced. Then came the pleading. Just let us buy you out, he said. We'll pay you back. We just need time. And money, I replied, which you don't have. His face crumpled slightly. I stood, walked to the filing cabinet, pulled out the ledger, the one I started 2 years ago when the requests began to multiply. I placed it on the table between us. I've documented everything, every transfer, every payment, every favor. Mom, I held up a hand. I'm not doing this to punish you. I'm doing it to remind you who I am. You forgot. Rachel forgot. But I never did. He picked up the folder, his hands trembling. What are you going to do? He whispered. I looked at him, my heart breaking even as my spine stayed straight. I'm going to run it, I said, until I decide otherwise. The business, the house, my life, and you, all of you, will remember that I was never a footnote in your story. You were living in mine. Caden came back the next day. He didn't knock this time, just stood on the porch with his hands in his pockets and shame in his eyes. I watched him through the window for a long moment before I opened the door. I'm not here to argue, he said. Good, I replied. I'm not here to apologize. He stepped inside. The house smelled like cinnamon. I'd been baking, not for anyone else, just for me, because I could. He sat down at the kitchen table, the same one he used to do his math homework on. The same table where we'd celebrated birthdays, scraped knees, report cards. Mom, he said, his voice barely holding. Rachel's gone. My breath caught. She left? I asked. She left a note, he replied. Took the car. Said she was tired of waiting for me to fix everything. He looked up at me, broken wide open. Not angry, not defensive, just a man standing in the ruins of a life built on borrowed money and buried truths. I don't know how to come back from this. I poured us both tea, chamomile, his childhood favorite. He stared at the steam rising from the cup like it held the answer. You don't come back, I said softly. You go forward, but you do it with your eyes open. He nodded slowly. I lost everything, he whispered. No, I said. You lost comfort, you lost illusion, but you still have your name, your hands, your heart. If you use them, you'll be just fine. The silence that followed wasn't heavy this time. It was healing, honest. I was a fool, he said. I let her talk me into things. I signed papers I didn't read. I let her handle it all because I didn't want to disappoint her. You didn't disappoint her, I said. You disappeared for her. His chin trembled, but he didn't cry. I miss the boy I raised, I told him gently but clearly. The one who used to scrape his knees and come running to me, not because he needed fixing, but because he knew I'd tell him the truth. He looked at me then, and for the first time in years, I saw it. Him, my boy, lost and found in the same breath. I want to earn it back, he said. All of it. Your trust, your respect, whatever's left. I reached across the table and took his hand. It was warm, calloused in places, the hand of a man who was ready, finally, to stop taking. You don't need to earn my love, I said. You already have it. You always will. But the rest, your dignity, your integrity, that's yours to reclaim. He nodded, slow and sure. Do you want to stay for dinner? I asked. He smiled, eyes shining. More than anything. We cooked together, just like old times. No boutique drama, no contracts, just onions and laughter and a roast chicken that turned out slightly dry, but no one cared. We were feeding more than hunger that night. We were feeding the part of ourselves that had gone starved for too long. Later, when the dishes were done and the kitchen smelled like soap and lemon and peace, he turned to me and said, I've been so afraid you'd never forgive me. I'm not here to punish, I said. I'm here to outlive. Because that's what I had done, hadn't I? I had outlived their expectations of me, outlived the silence, outlived the version of myself that said yes out of fear instead of choice. And I was still here. The house didn't sell. The boutique didn't collapse either. I kept my 51%, but I didn't run it with vengeance. I let it breathe. I hired a manager. a young woman named Marisol, smart and kind, and gave her what I had never been given: respect and room. As for Caden, he got a job, a real one, nothing flashy, a local firm doing accounts receivable. He started paying down his debts. He even showed up at my door last week with a handwritten check for $500. I know it's a drop in the bucket, he said, placing it on the table. I slid it back to him. Use it to open a savings account, I said. Not everything has to be paid back in dollars. Pay me with your life. He did. He calls every Sunday now. No requests, no strings, just his voice, warm and present. Sometimes he brings the kids. They draw pictures in my sunroom. They call me Lala, which I never asked for, but secretly adore. And Rachel? She never called, never apologized. Last I heard, she was living in Arizona, opening some new boutique with someone else's money. I wish her peace, truly, because peace is the only thing I have room for now. One afternoon, a month after it all ended, I walked through my little house, the house they tried to sell out from under me, and I realized something. It felt like mine again. Every corner, every floorboard, every window. And it wasn't just the bricks and wood. It was me, my name, my breath, my rhythm. I brewed a cup of tea, sat in my favorite chair, looked out at my roses, blooming, wild, defiant, and I whispered to the air, "You don't get to decide I'm done. You don't get to sell the roof from above my head. You don't get to write me out of my own life. Because here's what I know now, in my bones. We are never too old to reclaim what was ours, even if it takes every last ounce of courage. Even if it means saying no for the first time in a long life of yes. Even if it means sitting alone at first. Because there's a difference between being lonely and being free. And my darling, I've never been freer."